So welcome to this webinar for Motorsport UK trainers on the topic of virtual presentations. My name is James Betchley and I'm the Officials Pathway Manager at Motorsport UK. So over the course of the next hour or so, we're going to be looking at how you can run a virtual training session, and we'll be looking at some of the key considerations that need to be taken into account when transforming your usual face-to-face session into a virtual one. So just before we get started this evening, please be advised that this webinar is being recorded so that it can be shared with your colleagues who can't be here this evening, and also so that you can watch it back at a later date should you wish. If you'd like to raise any queries during the course of this session, please use the Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom of the screen, and we'll do our best to answer them as we go through. So, in joining us tonight from Motorsport UK, we have Sue Sanders, the Director of Learning and Development, myself, obviously the Officials Pathway Manager, and I'm very pleased to welcome Rupert Hine to the panel as well. So now I'll pass over to Sue to get us up and running with the presentation. Over to Sue.
Lovely. Thank you, James. That's great. I would like just to preview for you the 5 main areas that we're going to cover over the course of this. I reckon it's going to be around about an hour and a quarter, something of that sort, with some interaction on the way through. So what we'll also make available to you afterwards will be a downloadable PDF of the slides. So don't worry about trying to capture those on the way through. You'll be able to gather them afterwards when we send them over to you. So the 5 main areas that we're covering, I've tried to make it all P's so it's easy to remember. The first thing is we need to prepare. A lot of different aspects to prepare, of course, not just yourself. You notice I put that in twice, really important, but also the technology, the content, how we stage all of this, as well as, of course, of the audience. A lot of planning, and many of you, this will be familiar. This is standard trainer planning, so I'm not planning to take too long over that because you should know that already, I'm sure. Then there's the practical side, so we'll come into some of the technology at that point. Then we'll look at some of the presentation skills, what's different or the same between how we might need to present online or in a face-to-face scenario. And then finally, we'll pull it all together and draw some conclusions and do a little bit of feedback and finally review the whole process. So that is the way we're actually going to move. So to start off with, let's actually think about what the 4 main areas are when we're creating a virtual presentation. So the 4 steps are to make sure you know why you're doing it. If there is no clear purpose, then the audience will feel very lost. You might want to call them participants. It's kind of part of the program as to whether it's a participant or an audience. It's up to you to decide how that feels. So who are they? Who's actually here? I mean, we know that tonight we're all here, we're all trainers, we've been through the program, so we kind of know most of what's going on. But this might be for some brand new marshals, or it might be really experienced ones. So be clear about your audience, think about the content and how much time you've actually got to deliver that. And then finally, which James and Rupert will come on to a little bit later on, what format are you going to use? You know, we're doing this via Zoom, but Microsoft Teams is very effective. Cisco WebEx we've used before. Zoom is not the only one, but they are all very similar in many ways. So those are the 4 main steps. James is now going to look at some of the background considerations that we need to have in place.
Thank you, Sue. Obviously, there are a lot of key considerations, just like a face-to-face training event, that we need to take into account when we're planning for a virtual presentation. It says on the screen that we need to enable attendees, we need to create a professional feel. The subject matter, of course, a theory session via a virtual presentation is, of course, very much easier to get across than a practical session, for example. Most importantly, we need to keep it interactive. Very difficult to keep things interactive when people are hidden behind a screen and you can't see them. So we need to keep it upbeat. We need to keep people involved and tuned in to what we're talking about. And then importantly, again, at the end, we need to gather feedback. So we'll use those as the basic themes as we run through. But first of all, some considerations around Zoom. When looking at Zoom, there are actually 3 main options available for the type of training events that we deliver. Firstly, you could have a completely free account. Now, this allows up to 100 people to be in a Zoom call for a maximum of 40 minutes. This may be okay for very short presentations with limited interaction, but it's not recommended due to the fact that after 40 minutes, everybody gets kicked out and the event is abruptly over. So your second option then, for £11.99 a month, you can remove this time limit. However, you would still be restricted to 100 people. So your third option then is to look at the webinar side of things. This is where you are expecting more than 100 attendees, or where you simply want a bit more functionality. So as I say, the webinar option is there. It starts from £32 a month. This is on top of the £11.99 basic package fee. This can be cancelled after 1 month, so it could be used on an event-by-event basis if you don't want a rolling subscription throughout the year. And indeed, the BMSTT have actually confirmed that they will cover the costs for your Zoom subscription on a monthly basis. So if you were running a Zoom webinar in a single month, they would cover the cost of that month's subscription, or if you were running several events over the space of a couple of months, they will cover that couple of months subscription as well. So the club or the organizer can take out the account for 1 month at a time and then cancel it when they're not using it afterwards. I mentioned the functionality, and on the screen here you can see a few of the features, but by no means all of them. The key difference here, I think, between the meeting and the webinar functions are the host controls. With the webinar package, you have more control over who can be seen and heard, as well as access to a Q&A function, which we will talk more about in a moment. So just a few things there to bear in mind when planning your session. Ideally, you don't want to be limited in what you can do or can't do. So it's important that you take a look at the features and decide on the right platform for you. Someone who's actually been using Zoom a lot, both in a professional sense and a motorsport training sense, certainly over the past few months, is our panellist, Rupert Hine. So I'll pass over to Rupert to just give us a few more pointers on those two options.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I mean, really, you've got the bulk of the options there. There are so many different things you can do with Zoom, like the other packages, that really we're only ever going to scratch the surface. The other big difference that is worth remembering or knowing about is that you can do breakout rooms in Zoom, but only in Zoom meeting. So if you're planning a workshop where you want to divide people up into breakout rooms, then you want to run it as a meeting. And that's available both with the free and the paid for packages, but they hide it away and it's a function that you have to switch on. I know you're going to talk about some of the help options available a bit later, James, but the Zoom help is actually really good. So if you want to switch on breakout rooms, go and have a look in the help. It tells you how to do it. The other consideration is if you're running bigger events and you want to be able to brand them, you want to have more control over the information you've got afterwards, then webinars are probably the way to go. So the webinars that we've been running with the Scottish Association, we can pull off, because we're running them through webinar, we can pull off full reports of everyone who's registered, how long, when they joined, if they joined the event, how long they were on for, and all of those sorts of things, as well as the results of polls. So we can then build that into the if you like, the aftercare. So in many ways, webinar gives you a more professional setup, but for smaller groups, meeting is certainly probably the more cost-effective thing. And if you're doing something interactive, breakout rooms are really good. They're really good fun, and they're available in the meeting version.
Thank you for that, Rupert. That's brilliant. And obviously you mentioned there about the Zoom Help Centre. As you see on the screen, there, support.zoom.us is where you'll find that. Of course, I've put the title on this screen here as enabling your attendees. This is also enabling yourself, as Rupert says. There's plenty of material on there. As the host of a session, you are able to control various aspects of the Zoom meeting, such as turning off individual microphones and webcams, And a lot of these features can take place automatically when people join the call. So you can simply set these automatic controls up when you're setting up your session in the Zoom account. So I'd recommend familiarising yourself with the controls, and I'd recommend taking a look at the Zoom Help Centre, where you will find how-to videos and guides. And also on the Motorsport UK website, you'll find the Zoom video calling step-by-step instructions sheet, which will show you how to set up a meeting on Zoom. Another feature that you can choose to activate, of course, is the automatic recording of a session. However, if you do, you must advise the participants that they are being recorded, as we did at the beginning of this session today. So as well as enabling your audience, your attendees, by explaining how to access the session, you also need to prep them. So joining instructions should be emailed in advance of the meeting, just as you would with a face-to-face session, and need to advise of the topics that will be covered, and if they will be required to have done any pre-reading prior to the session. They should also include details on what materials they need to have to hand, a blue book, for example, and whether they'll need to take notes or whether you will be sharing the slides with them afterwards. If applicable, questions can be invited at the time of registration on the Zoom call, so that they can be answered during the session themselves. So it's a good idea to make sure that you have the correct answers to those questions in advance of the session. Over to Sue.
Okay, just before I go on to this next slide, so if you can scoot back 1 second for me, James, please. We just had one question about what is a breakout room. Really sensible question. If you imagine this was a virtual conference centre, and you're in the main meeting room, and then you go out to breakout rooms to have small groups, you can actually set up breakout rooms within Zoom, so that you can actually have these virtual rooms. So you can set them up, for example, for specific disciplines, or if you're talking at a club night, for example, and you may want some people to go and work on what will be important in terms of setting up for safety, what will be important in terms of setting up for marshals' welfare. You could get different groups of people from within your participants to work in different rooms. You can actually pop in and out of those rooms and join in and go away again, and then they can come back and they can share their responses. So it really does work just like it would on a conference centre. Rupert, you've used these many times. Is there anything you just want to add to that?
The only thing I'd add, Sue, is it's well worth having a play with them before you use them for real. They are incredibly useful. I'll be using them at 6:30 tomorrow morning for some networking that I'm running, and we'll have 10 or 12 meeting rooms going where you can automatically put people, so that the system decides who goes where, so you can randomize the groups, you can select people, you can move people about, and as Sue says, the host can move in and out of those rooms. The one thing to say is that only one person can control those rooms, and that's the host. So if you've got a group of panelists, for example, or co-hosts, they go where you send them. They can't control the breakout rooms, but you can broadcast messages into the rooms. People can put their hands up. They can do all sorts of stuff. But as Sue says, think of it as those side rooms that you would send groups of people off to work in during the course of your seminar.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And now you've seen just how that question and answer session works. Please feel comfortable to ask other questions in that way. And the questions, if we answer them on the screen, then you'll get a copy of that. But if we answer them live, clearly you'll have the answers in the recording. And most of them we'll try to answer live, because that way we can give a more complete response. So they'll mostly be answered live. Okay, so let's now look at your stage, because if this were a live presentation, you would have a stage, and I happen to love this cartoon. I'll give you a moment. Yeah, just kind of, it's perfect. You do need to make sure you've got decent internet. It's one of those things that we all struggle with, and even on the FIA held a major sport conference last month, and the very opening piece, Jean Todt was standing in Paris at the top of the FIA building, and the internet was lousy. No doubt it was brilliant when they rehearsed. I'm absolutely certain that it would have been perfect. But when he stood there, it just did not work as well as expected. So, you know, how good is the internet? And just do make sure you check it. And if it's no good, go somewhere else. Go around next door, you know, ask if you can borrow theirs if theirs is any better. But maybe you might need a headset or a mic, especially if you've got background noise, or if you've got any difficulties with your microphone. And I will say, excuse me, on James's behalf at this moment, technical stuff, James has had a problem with his microphone. It appears to be fading in and out. So we don't quite know what's going on. And if there is something that we can't hear, we're just going to ask him to repeat it. So always have your background plan. You know, plan B is always a good one to deal with these things. So backing plans are good. So on a visual basis, think about backdrops. And that is also determined by the processor you have. So for instance, Rupert and I are on an i7 processor. Yes? Nod. Correct. James, however, is on an i5 processor. I am trying to get him some more up-to-date equipment, I promise. I am. But the difference is that James is unable to put the backdrop up because that processor will not take it. So James has to completely move his entire room around in order to get a blank, non-distracting background. So it is possible to do those things. On Teams, you can actually put the background on even with an i5 processor. So i5 or i7 processors are the Intel Inside bit. You know, you get that strange Intel Inside button and a logo. Pretty much all laptops that you would purchase now would be an i7. There's lots of different versions, and it's probably those that are 3 years or more old that would have an i5. But it would probably say on the front of your laptop or maybe on the underneath. So to answer that question, is it worth wired rather than Wi-Fi? I'm not technical completely, but yes, it's stronger. You know you've got that guarantee. You know you've got that consistency. So, you know, it would give you that added level of security. If you can put the backdrop on your i5, please ping us how, because all of the Motorsport UK staff on an i5 processor are unable to do it. We need to know your secret. So Tony, let us know. Kevin, you have a response to this one, no doubt as well. Could I ask you, Kevin, if there is a response, could you perhaps share it via the chat or the Q&A, and then we can share it with everyone afterwards? That would be brilliant. If the laptop is 14 years old, give it a try. It may just be that you can't have a backdrop. You'll be able to do pretty much everything else. So, you know, the program is more about you presenting and less about the backdrop. So don't worry too much. The other thing, though, to be very thoughtful about is the light. And that is something you can control regardless. If the light is behind you, you look like you're coming from the dark side of the moon. And all you can see is a shadow. You can't see expression or all those sorts of things. So try and make sure you can have a light in front of you. I'm just going to lean up. You can add lights, you know, and that kind of gets a bit too bright for my liking. But if things aren't working terribly well, always try and have an extra light if you can. Think also about where is your camera. I don't know about you, but I've sat in many of these now where somebody's camera is right at the low level near the keyboard. And they may not be the presenter, but they're sitting there as one of the panelists. And all you can see is their fingers typing, right? And it looks awful. It really does. If you're a panelist or a support presenter and you know you've got to do a little bit of typing, put your video on mute so that they can't see it happening. Most cameras these days tend to be at the top of the screen, not at the bottom, but not all. Well done for that one. Thank you for that extra little bit about the newer version of i5. That's in the chat box if you haven't been to look already. Thank you. So where is the camera and where are you in relation to that camera? Being a short person, if I'm not very careful and I lower my seat then I'm really, really low down. But if I lift my seat, then I tend to get more in the centre. So ideally, you want to be just slightly off centre one side or slightly off centre to the other, rather than always bang in the middle. Try and give it a little bit of movement. So just think about where you are in relation to whatever else is going on in your background. Otherwise, think about something to drink, tea, coffee, water. James is going to laugh now. Gummy bears, sorry. Maybe you need something, just something to keep you going. Rupert has an amazing tip about juice. Rupert.
Yeah, it's one that I got through work and doing lots of presentations, and particularly on stage if you're doing a lot of talking, and that's go for apple juice. Rather than water or other sorts of juice, apple juice tends to line your throat a bit more and just helps you keep talking more naturally for longer. For long presentations, which isn't so much what we're doing in the virtual world, but certainly if you're on stage for a long period of time, the other benefit of apple juice is you need to visit the bathroom less frequently, which can be a significant consideration if you're on stage for a long period of time.
Great. And the last thing on preparing your stage is, what are you going to do with your notes? I mean, if you're doing a face-to-face training program, you can actually walk around with a clipboard, some notes, some handouts, copies of your slides, all of those things. If you're only working off a single laptop, then what's on your screen, and we'll talk about this a little later on, is what the audience will see. So unless you're going to be clever and have two screens, you can't use Presenter View. And James will explain a little later on, because he happily has Presenter View with this, and you can't see it. But if you've got a lot of notes written down, clearly I haven't at the moment, and you start to look down at them, that's not clever. Also, if you have post-it notes with key points on, it's great. Stick them all around the outside of your screen, but make sure you don't cover the camera. That's not very clever. So presenters use post-it notes. It can really help. But you do need to always try and look at the camera when you're sharing information, not down when if you're going to look at notes. So that's a little bit about preparing your stage. Rupert, you're going to share stuff about how we prepare ourselves with some quite weird clip art.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really key with the online world is keeping people's interest. And so you need to be much more dynamic. And so before you start the webinar, it's really worth preparing yourself. You know, it's about getting your head in the right place, exercising that brain. So if you think about all high performers, you know, Lewis Hamilton's not going to get into his F1 car before he's got his race head on. And we might joke about racing drivers taking the brain out and all the rest of it. But actually, it is about getting that competition head right. So for us, it's about getting the trainer head on. So there's a few tips. The key to all of this is making sure that you're feeling really confident. So first of all, let's have a go with the chat box, and appreciate that we're going to see this and you're going to be typing stuff into it. What are your thoughts about some of the things that you can do to make you feel confident before a presentation? So answers in the chat box, some of the things that you can do to make yourself feel more confident and feel really confident, fired up before a presentation. So let's get typing. Know your subject, always a good start. Run through the slides, practice. Absolutely. Run through it a couple of times. Bit of physical exercise, absolutely. Yeah, get some energy flowing. So few keyboard enthusiasts are typing away there. Any more going to come in? Yeah, dry run, prepare well, good room. Make sure you know the answers, good temperature, know your topic. Yeah, some really good stuff there. So rehearsal is really important. You know, it's about making sure you know your lines and you're familiar with the subject. And that means that you need to own your presentation. So it's really great if somebody else has done a lot of work to help you. And the likes of this evening, James has put a massive amount of work into pulling this together. But at the same time, the bits that Sue and I are doing, we've owned, because we need to understand what's happening. So it's really great, and you really need to know what's coming up. I mean, it's sort of a bit about how many times have you heard somebody who's presenting say, well, I think the next slide, well, I wasn't expecting that. And it really detracts from that professional feel. The second thing is it's actually really worthwhile having some rituals that get your mind in the right place. So, a bit like Nigel talking about the exercise, my favorite is a form of visualization. So this is where Sue sort of says we go on to the weird. It's actually really well established, and it's quite a powerful technique that business owners use, that athletes use, and so on. But just take a couple of moments to imagine the best possible outcome you could have, the best possible presentation that you could deliver, the outcomes people will take for it, the successful events that delegates will go and enable, people having fun, whatever the picture in your mind is. Then walk through the session, section by section. So almost imagine it word for word. So Jack Nicklaus, the golfer, used to do this. He used to play every shot of every major in his mind before that competition. He'd done it 15 times a day, for weeks in the run-up to the competition. So he knew what he was doing. It was second nature. The third thing that you can do is it's onto the two most powerful words in the English language, and that's I am. And it's what's called affirmations. The brain is a really powerful instrument, but it believes what you tell it with conviction. So I am confident, I'm a great communicator, I'm standing proud, I'm ready, I'm alert, I'm engaging, I'm inspirational, I'm in control, I'm smiling. Make the ones up that are personal to you. But if you say those things to yourself before you go, and say them out loud, so you might need to suspend disbelief in the rest of the family, but say them out loud, your brain takes it in, you feel fired up, you're better able to go. Also important, Sue's mentioned your environment. Sit comfortably. What's your power pose? Upright, shoulders back, feet in the ready position. So you're feeling confident. And the most important bit of your rehearsal is know your opening line. So you really need to know how to get off to a great start. So it's know that line and say it well. It's very much about the whole learn this as though it was a Shakespearean play. So you can use that to get you going. You've got the way to position what people are going to get from it, and particularly the afters, the things that are in it for them. So if you've got those in the front of your mind, you can bring them forward, and it's about confidently presenting it. Somebody mentioned preparing some questions. One of the joys of using the webinar version is that the delegates don't actually know, and you'll be seeing this yourselves. You don't know how many other people are on. Now, we can see that there's, whatever it is, 23, 25 of you on the call this evening, but they don't know, you don't know what questions other people are asking. So if things go quiet, if you've got a couple of questions up your sleeve, you can ask them, you can present them as though they've come from the audience, which has the effect of loosening people up. So it fills the awkward silence and gets people asking. So it's about enabling people to ask, but it's also about helping you to feel confident about it. And of course, along the way, remember to keep the energy up. Your positive position, the positive language. You're trying to pitch this somewhere between warrior and sage. So when you're not in the same room as people, you need to be putting out more energy than normal. So the calm, thoughtful, gentle manner that might work if you were with people in person would probably send people to sleep online. On the other hand, the warrior who's bouncing about on the stage or is dashing about on the screen and bouncing off at each corner, which is a bit like the sort of Steve Ballmer at the Microsoft conference. And if you haven't seen it, find it on YouTube. It is an incredible performance. And most Brits tend to look at it and think, oh my God. It's a bit over the top, and it's likely to exhaust people. So it's about a good level of energy without being over the top. And as a rule of thumb, you probably need to keep the pace up higher than if you were in the room. People's attention spans are shorter online, so you'll need to keep moving. And of course, most important of all, smile. Quite apart from the fact that smiling causes other people to feel better, it also, using the smiling muscles in your face, causes you to release the endorphins in your brain and makes you feel happier and more positive. So smiling isn't just an expression of happiness, it actually helps cause it. So as I say, it's about the level of prep that you would do if you were the lead in a Shakespearean play in the West End. How much effort would you put in to make sure you got your delivery right? And why would you do any less for the people on the end of your webinar? So, thank you, James.
Thank you, Rupert. That's fantastic. And I think we've pretty much covered this slide here, changing your background, as Sue says. That picture, of course, is taken from a Teams meeting where I was able to change my background. And as is being pointed out to us in the chat by a couple of people now, if you do have an i5 processor, you can do it, but it depends on the version of the processor that you have. So if you have an i5 processor that's 10th generation or 8th or 9th generation, you can change your background in Zoom. I'm imagining that mine is, yes, in fact, I look at the sticker now, and mine says it's 7th generation. So I've just missed out on that one. So Sue, we'll add that to the budget for next year, shall we?
I think we'd better.
Yes, but obviously having a custom background, as Sue says, it makes the presenter stand out and it provides a tidy and professional image. So I'll pass back over to you now, Sue.
Indeed, thank you. There have been lots and lots of really helpful comments that have come through in the chat, and somebody earlier said that not everybody can see them. Just when you do make a chat, you have options as to who you share it with. You can either share it with the panelists only, or with the panelists and all attendees, and then of course everybody can see. So just make sure how you're doing that as you start to put a chat notification out there. Looking at these people, you who are here on this webinar, it's amazing. There are such great trainers with such a huge amount of experience that's in here, and at this point, when I'm talking about planning your webinar, I would just like to say a big thank you to all of you, because with the experience you've got, to consider that you're all still open-minded enough to think that maybe there's something new that you can gain from this is fantastic. And if we were all only quite that open-minded, the world would be a better place. Now, it may be that there are only a few topics that are different, and I think this next section is probably the least likely to do that. But nevertheless, it's still just as important that we include it now as we would at any other time. So the four main things we talked about before: purpose, audience, content, and format. So let's have a look at those first of all and consider purpose. So the purpose element of all this is about, why are we doing it? The who is it for? Who the host and panelist should be will matter. We did so many of these during COVID, and sometimes we might have brought in Dr. Paul Trafford, sometimes we didn't. Sometimes we bring in paramedics, sometimes we didn't. Sometimes we brought in John Ryan. Well, actually, all the time we brought in John Ryan, but it wasn't the same panelists every time, because the topic and the audience was slightly different each time. So do think about who it is and who's going to sit on the panel. And the other thing is to make sure that those on the panel are either showing the videos, if it's appropriate, and there's only 3 of us, so we discussed it and we decided it was. But if it's a big group on the panel, then I would suggest that most of the time they are on video mute. Make sure you're clear about the main topics that you must cover. So what really has got to be included in order to achieve that purpose? And try and find some solid benefits about why people will attend. For us, this is about making sure that if you've not already run a webinar, that you have the confidence to give it a go. And that if you've already tried them, there are a few more tips and hints as to what you might do differently or how you might play around with it just a little bit more. When you're sending the invitation out, Send it to those who will benefit. Don't just send it to the wide world, because there's no use or benefit in that. And when you get the registrations back, you can see who's actually signed up, and you can see them by name, and you know who has said they would come. Doesn't guarantee they're actually going to turn up, but it's actually who has said they were coming. So when we know what we've got to do, why, and who we're doing it for, then we can go on to think about what it is that we're actually going to say. So that's the second part, is the third part is what we're going to say. So when we think about the content, we need to know a little bit more than, I really want to say, I don't know what I want to say. You know, we need to be clear about it. If we don't know what we want to say, don't bother doing it. It's that simple. So let's just take these key points. When you decide what you're going to say, first of all, make sure you're clear in your own mind about the broad theme. I know I've got to cover all of these big topics. And if you think about what we did in the preview, the 5 steps, that's your theme. Then list all the points that you could potentially include that are relevant. And then when you've listed all of those points, choose the ones that must be included. And then the rest, just keep up your sleeve if you run out of time and you need something else. Work out your timings. How long will this take? How long will that take? Have I really got time to do it all? And in conjunction with that, put your sequence in place. Don't forget that you need an introduction and a summary. So you've got less time to deliver all those main themes than you really think you've got. And then lastly, but not least on what you're going to say, make sure you've got the evidence and supporting information to go along with it. Don't guess. Don't say, oh, it's somewhere in the blue book. You know, where in the blue book? You know, let us know. So make sure you've got that supporting information. The next point, how are you going to say it? So when you're putting this together, as with any other presentation, we'd have a course planner. I'm not saying these timings are correct, by the way. They're a little bit out already by about 7 minutes. So if you see me turn down and make a note every now and again, it's because I'm keeping a check of how wrong we are with our time estimates. So we know what the title is, that's our theme. We know the purpose of these things, and then we know what the key topics are. Now, if we were in a face-to-face, we would do a little bit more. And you can see here that under planning, we've got an activity chat. We've got another activity when we talk about keeping it interactive. And you can see who's doing which slide, and you know the preparation is there. So we know what, but then we need to add in a little bit about how. So if we move on to deciding how we're going to say it, I want to just share a couple of points with you and then ask you a question. Obviously, we need to know what the structure is, and we've already talked about notes or keywords. So if you haven't yet used the chat box, what I would suggest you do is make a little note now about anything else you think we should consider, all of us, because this is a whole group of trainers. What do you think we should consider when we're planning how to deliver virtual training? Alistair, for example, I think you just said that we can move the speaker window too. Yeah, the audience, the panelists, and sorry, the participants can move people around. And in a little while, we'll talk about split screens and those sorts of things. So, yeah, what else have we got coming up? Graham, you've got us all in the top right-hand corner. That's very kind. For me, you're all in the bottom right-hand corner. I don't know. That's concentration span of delegates. Good one, Nigel. I shall come back to that in just a moment when we talk about Zoom fatigue. I'll come back to that just in a second. So yeah, who's in full screen? Yeah, who wants to do that? You can change things around a bit. You can put people in gallery mode for sure. 2 screens if possible. Really, really good. Thanks, Kevin. Okay, so that is a really simple example of how we can make something interactive. And that's just what you do in the real world, isn't it? So let's move on a little bit further with how we're going to say it. Last few points under this one. My 3 Ps, some of you will have seen and heard me do the 3 Ps before. I wouldn't normally use the word pertinent, but it wouldn't be 3 Ps if I didn't. So they're in there. And moving on from the 3 Ps, please. Thank you. There we go, got it. Visual aids. We have used a few different examples in here, and we will use a few different examples of visual aids. It is always a challenge because in general we prefer not to use clip art. It's not exactly the way things are done these days, but sometimes it's actually the only way that it can actually be delivered well and properly. So, you know, there is a bit of a balance here, but we want to make sure that it is, especially for safety topics, although you want them to be interesting, if you can show a photograph of it rather than a clip art of it, it would be much more effective. So do try and make sure you use visual aids. Kevin had his hand up. Kevin, is there anything you've put in a question or a chat box for us at the moment? I'm not sure. Come back to you in a minute. It is noted that you put your hand up. Anecdotes and humour. If you're not a joke teller, then don't tell a joke. It's not going to work. It certainly won't work on here, so avoid anecdotes and humour wherever you possibly can, unless you are really a good joke teller. That's all. That's my best advice to you. But rehearsing. The three of us wrote all our pieces. We rehearsed it ourselves. We rehearsed it together yesterday, and we rehearsed it again today. Nothing can get better than rehearsal. The last 2 points I want to make is about how you present yourself. So do you wave your arms around? Who mentioned earlier on something about, so if you're looking at something, somebody mentioned Stubbsy as being the guy that was jumping about all over the place. That was an exact description, I totally agree. But how do you present yourself? Where do you look? Where are you in all of this? If you want to make a real point to the audience, you've got to look directly into that camera, exactly as you would if you're looking into the audience's eyes. You're kind of on television, so try and be the presenter on the One Show or Good Morning Britain or whatever they're called. If only I have had time to watch, they would be good. But keep your purpose in mind at all times. At all times. Whew, I'm going to have a break now. It's time to move on. Hopefully that helps look at the 4 of those steps to planning your presentation.
Thanks, Sue. Now we've just touched upon screen sharing there, and we've had some good comments in the chat box already. But as we've already said, PowerPoint presentations, they're a great way to run theory-based sessions, and within Zoom you have the option to share your screen with the participants and therefore run through a presentation, as we're doing at the moment. For talks and practical demonstrations, of course, you don't have to share a screen. You could simply talk into the camera and talk through certain subjects. The way that you appear on the screen, so at the moment you can probably see, depending on how you've got your settings, you can probably see us either in the top right hand corner, or you might have moved us to the top left or down to the bottom. As you see, the way that you view the presenters is actually down to you. If you click on the button at the bottom of the screen for you, you'll be able to amend how you view the people that are presenting the presentation. If you want your attendees, your participants, to view you in a certain way, then you need to let them know in advance of the meeting, or at the beginning of the meeting at least, so that they can adjust their settings accordingly. Otherwise, the default setting will be, as probably most of you are seeing at the moment, seeing us in a few boxes, or just one box as the spotlight speaker in the top right hand corner. A few of you have mentioned about 2 screens. Now, if you are using a PowerPoint presentation, it is actually recommended that you have 2 computer screens, although I know a lot of you probably won't have 2 screens at your disposal. If you don't have a second computer screen, you can run an HDMI lead from your laptop or PC into a television with an HDMI port, and this can act as a second screen. And most televisions these days will also have a VGA port, so if you don't have an HDMI port on your laptop or PC, you can still do it by a VGA cable. So I'll pass over to Rupert now, who's going to run through a few more advanced settings for sharing your screen and audio and things like that.
Thanks, James. T'other James on the line was just asking, what do we see? So as a host or panelist, we can see ourselves. We can see the presentation, but we can't see the audience. What we can see is a list of you. and we can see when you put your hands up, and conveniently, if you put your hands up, you come to the top of the list, and Zoom gives us a count and things like that. So we've got lots of boxes to look at, and if you see the three of us glancing around, it's because we've got various screens either on the same system or on a separate machine, so that we can just spot what's going on. Anyway, that's by the by. Just pick that one up as we go. When it comes to sharing your screen, and particularly if you start sharing sound and video, there are some more things to think about. So Sue's talked about visual aids. You might want to share some background music if you're in the position you can play background music, or indeed audio files. So recently we were sharing some recordings of radio conversations, for example. Probably the easiest way to do that is to make sure that any clips you want, so particularly video or audio clips, are downloaded on your computer and embedded into the PowerPoint file. Trying to stream video from an online source like YouTube or Vimeo, whilst PowerPoint tries to encourage you to do so, it just adds to the extra burden on your internet connection. And so that increases the risk that the audience don't get the experience that you want, or indeed they don't get the experience that you're seeing yourself. So I've learned this along with John and some of the other guys in the Scottish Association the hard way, where we've had video that was playing really nicely for us, but the audience is seeing it stutter. So the first thing you want to do, so it's all about how you set it up to play. So this applies to sharing your PowerPoint screen, but also if you then want to go on and share audio and video as well. So first thing to do is open your PowerPoint presentation and put it into the presentation mode. So James has talked about having two screens. Ideally, you will end up with one screen which has got your presenter view and the other one with the slides you're sharing. Then you want to go back to your Zoom window. I always get lost trying to shuffle between the various windows, but go back to your Zoom window and select share. So that's the green option at the bottom that says share, and that'll bring up a window like the one you're seeing on the screen in front of you. Now that will give you lots of different options. In my case, I've got three screens because I'm greedy. So you can see the three screens. You can see the option for it linking to an iPhone or to the whiteboard, and then different windows that I've got open. So I've got the snipping tool open because I was doing screenshots, but the two important ones are the ones that you will see at the bottom right, and particularly the one that's right at the bottom right. And I've now gone off my script, so James is now wondering, but so that one with the arrow. Now that's the screen that I want to share. So that's the one which actually has the PowerPoint presentation slide, not the one to its left, which has got my speaker notes in, because I don't want to share that. I want to be able to see that, but I don't want the audience to see it. So select the one you want the audience to see. And that means they don't see everything else you've got open. So you could share one of the screens if that's got the appropriate thing on. The disadvantage of that is they may see other stuff that you've got on the screen, or you minimize something and they see whatever's behind it. Whereas if you go for just the PowerPoint slide, that's all they will see. Next, if you want to share the sound, then you'll need to tick the box at the bottom that says share computer sound. Just think about what the sound is that's going to be going on your computer. But if you're going to share sound, that's the box you need to tick. And then the third thing to think about is, are you sharing video? So video can be a problem depending upon both the size of the video file and the size of the rest of the presentation. Most of the time, what I've found is that the video tends to stutter unless you tick this box. So the optimize video share box. That said, if the rest of the presentation is really dense, so for example, you've got a really big background picture and your video is a small screen in the middle of it, then we've found that ticking that box reduces the clarity and definition of your static text. So we were using one of the FIA templates the other week, and they've got a truly enormous background image. I'm not quite sure how they've made it quite so big a file size. It's very nice, but it did mean that if we tick that box, you almost couldn't make out the definition of the text. So the other thing you can do is make sure it's the host who's sharing the video, so whoever's on Zoom as the host, and that they've got a really good computer and a nice internet connection. Because if you can get the footage out there, then it's down to the internet connection coming in for your audience. The real message with this is, if you're sharing big video clips, please practice. Get somebody else on the call with you and try it. And so before we did the FIA presentation, the Scottish Speed Run the other week, Pete Lawton, who was presenting, and I did quite a bit of practicing to get the right set of the set of settings. So once you've ticked the right boxes, then it's finally click share in the bottom right, and away you go. The final thing to watch out for is if you are sharing your computer sound, and of course this is good practice anyway, and Sue's talked about what else is going on in your environment, please remember to silence all the alarms or notifications on your computer. Otherwise, your audience is going to know about every WhatsApp you've got arriving or the emails pinging into your machine. And quite apart from that being irritating to you, it's quite distracting for them as well.
Thanks, Rupert. On that note, what a great thing certainly on Windows 10, if you go to your desktop and click in the bottom right hand corner, you'll find the button for notifications. You can set that to focus mode, which will silence all of your alarms and pop-ups. I've fallen foul of it myself before in a presentation where emails and notifications, because I was sharing the screen rather than the program, were appearing in the bottom right hand corner. So if you tick that box, it will only send you the most important stuff, which you can set up in the settings of. You can silence the rest of them. So it's a good tip there. So presenting team, just like a face-to-face training session, it is of course very important to choose the right people to be your co-hosts or panelists if you're running a webinar. So not only can your presenting team assist in the running of the event by doing things such as answering questions, Sue's doing a fantastic job on the Q&A at the moment, but by switching presenter every now and again, you're actually keeping the attention of the attendees. You're mixing it up, you're keeping the voice fresh, and you're keeping people's attention as we're going through. When you do switch presenters, there are a few things, of course, that you need to have considered beforehand. Each speaker needs to be aware of the process for changing over. For example, should they be prepared to take themselves off mute before speaking, or will the host take them off mute? It's also vitally important that the person that has just finished speaking goes on mute themselves. I've seen instances where people have handed over to the next presenter and then proceeded to tap away on their keyboard or shuffle paperwork whilst their colleagues are trying to speak and present their section. So just something to bear in mind there. Get the procedure right from the beginning so everyone knows what to do. Technical errors, we've just spoken about, things can go wrong. As mentioned earlier on, my microphone has been playing up. And we've all seen a live broadcast on the television, for example, where a presenter has tried to hand over to another and they stare blankly at the screen for a few moments because they can't hear them before going back to the studio, and they say, we'll try again later. These exact things can happen on Zoom as well, whereby someone may start to speak and they don't know that they're on mute, for example, or their internet connection might be unstable. So just have a plan for when those things do go wrong, that the host should be prepared to step in and take over at any moment, really, and steer the ship in the right direction. When it comes to the Q&A session, have one person asking the questions to the panel, and they will then invite the panelists to provide an answer if necessary, live, or of course they can answer it in the Q&A box itself. At that moment, Sue, is there anything coming in on the Q&A that you'd like to raise?
Yeah, there are three really good points that I think are appropriate, and it's relevant to what we're doing right now. So James says, on a webinar, as a host or panelist, can you see all the participants on their cameras or just get a list of names? So if we click on, there's a box at the bottom that says participants and the number, we can click on that and we can see the names of everyone. And as hosts or co-hosts, we can then click to either let your video be seen and or not. So we can choose to let you in to join us, as it were, or leave you out in the auditorium. And on this occasion, we've left you in the auditorium, I'm afraid. So yes, you do have that choice. So it's not always the case that you're going to use PowerPoint presentations or anything else. It might be that you host it as, what I would call like a broadcast, for example. So it might be a straightforward presentation that you're delivering, and you can see the entire group. I've been on a number of different Zoom calls where there can be up to 40, 50, 60, 100 people all peering out at the screen if you scroll around enough. And some of the international ones have anything up to 400 or 500 people on the screen, and it's huge. It certainly is very distracting when that's the case, and you tend to scroll around and look at everybody and send private chat messages to them. And so the way we're doing it is a lot less distracting for a short, focused program. Kevin, yes, if you have got a large number of panelists, absolutely have one person generally dedicated to administration. I know during the COVID ones, my fingers seem to be flying over the keyboards on a lot of occasions in the background, trying to get all the answers out there. When there are only 3 of us, we're kind of managing it between us, and it can be that little bit more interactive. But certainly looking at what's coming in on chat, either answering the questions live or answering them in a text way. Definitely, if you've got somebody dedicated, or you choose how you're going to do it amongst the panelists. And lastly, from Nigel, is there a preview setting so you can check what's being sent is the correct screen? Yes, you can go on early, like we did, and you can actually see the rehearsal. And basically it says, this is what it is, and it only goes live when you press the button that says broadcast. So what you see on your screen is what they will get. So you can check it yourself. And if you're not sure, ask a friend. They'll always just go, yeah, that's right. Honestly, it's a little bit like that magnet in the screen behind you when you're delivering a presentation. It's kind of nice just to check that what's on the laptop is exactly the same as on the screen. Get a friend to confirm it, but it will be. So yeah, those are the 3 questions that have come in. So hopefully those are all done. I'm going to just click answered live to all of those, so you know what I'm doing right now. And they're all done.
Thanks, Sue.
Okay.
Just on that point about practicing, when you actually set up, certainly if you're using the webinar functionality, when you're setting up the webinar itself, you need to make sure that you tick the box that says allow practice session. Allows you to go in before broadcasting, so that, as Sue says, you can run through it and check that everything's working. And it's certainly a good idea. We did it before this one, and certainly with all of the COVID ones, with the whole panel logged in at least half an hour before and just ran through a few bits. And as it says on the screen at the moment, that was how we managed to get across our clear process for changing over and how the webinar was going to run. So it's certainly worth doing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll crack on then, and Sue, it's over to you.
It's me for opening. I know this seems a little backwards, but we've been trying to chunk this into logical pieces. So this is now all about just the presentation piece itself. So when you start, what is the opening like? How are the introductions done? I mean, James gave a really excellent example of how that works with the webinar starting shortly, who's on the panel, introducing yourself, then the process, the panelists, if you've got more than just the 3 of us, a preview of what the topics are. Obviously, James covered exactly that it was being recorded so that there's no confusion about that, and what you're going to get afterwards. So those are things that you need to almost get into automatic pilot, like you would have done with the housekeeping when you do a normal training session. This is the equivalent of that housekeeping, because I'm sure everybody knows where the toilets and the tea and coffee are when we're doing these. So that's as far as the opening and presentations are concerned. When we move on from the opening, of course, the next stage we need to think about is the content. We've already talked about what you're going to say and what format it's going to be in, but think about it in a visual sense. Is it following a logical pathway? People's attention span, somebody said it on the chat a little earlier on, it's absolutely correct. Our attention span on a webinar is really short. I think, what is it you say, Rupert? Maximum 7 minutes you go for without a change, something like that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So try and, you'll see that, you know, we've had quite a lot of changes between the three of us. Very deliberate to give you that variety and that difference. We've also had slides that have been still, you know, slides that have had clip art in, slides that have had actual imagery in. So we've tried to mix that little lot around as well. Keeping the slides simple is great. People somehow feel that because this is like beamed live into somebody's office, sitting room, living room or bedroom, that they can put lots more text on than they would in a training room. It's still not good because people don't have large screens all the time. And, you know, if you're sitting and looking at this on a tablet or your phone, then you don't want a lot of text. Not everybody's going to be watching it on a, you know, 10, 20, 30-inch screen or whatever it might be. So the ABC of keep your slides simple, keep them accurate, keep them brief, and make sure they're clear. So in terms of that, the visual side of this, you should all be familiar with Morabium's pie chart of what we say, how we say it, and all of the non-verbal that goes with all of that. So I'm sure you all know that the red is the non-verbal. That's the nodding of the head, that's the smiling at the camera, that's the looking directly in. But we've only got kind of from the head or shoulders up. So instead of being able to wave our arms around and have a comfortable body, our presentation is really cut in a quarter. We've only got part of ourselves that we're doing the non-verbal. The tone of voice, therefore, is even more critical than it would be before. Rupert mentioned at the beginning about energy, and getting that energy in your voice is absolutely vital. I'm sure you've listened to presentations where people, they're sitting back and they're talking about it, and it's, you know, I might not be reading a script, but I'm really comfortable with my material. And it's like, oh no, stop it. You know, you're not on video yourselves. If you go and get a cup of coffee, if you go to the toilet, if you go and watch the telly and come back, we haven't got a clue. Really and truly, as presenters, we have to engage with you to keep you with us. And those words are vital, but you've got to practice those in advance. So like the Shakespearean play, you're not even thinking about the words in the end. You know them well enough that it's how you put them over that is the critical point. So content, absolutely vital that we get that right. So in terms of presenting ourselves, look directly at the camera, especially when you're making a point. It isn't a lecture. You can move around a bit if you want. Make sure you speak really clearly. Visual, audible, all of those nervous, you know, like tics or whatever yours might be. I can't think of any others at the moment. But if you've got those distracting mannerisms and things with the words that you say, they will for sure be magnified. Think about what you're wearing. I mean, we're all trying to, yes, you see, I am tall enough to show that I'm wearing a Motorsport UK shirt. But what are you wearing? Do you look, well done, James, you see, we're here. Do you look like you should be presenting? Would you dress like you are if you were in front of the trainees delivering a theory session? So that's the question to ask yourself. Think about what you're wearing. What you're going to see now, you might not like. I'm ready. Is it going to come and annoy me? Yes, came and annoyed me. When we're presenting our slides, we don't want the whizzy stuff. Exactly like we don't want the whizzy stuff in a real life presentation, it really still doesn't work in this virtual presentation. Let it just appear. Don't have it slide in, because as you can see, it can judder. It's just annoying, quite horrible. So make sure it's completely non-distracting. James is going to do that to me whenever he wants to annoy me now, I can tell. So presenting yourself is absolutely critical, and do remember, look into the camera. It's really important. Okay, let us move on, please. I think James, oh no, Rupert, this is more interaction. Oh no, James, it is you.
No, I think it's back to me again, Sue. Yeah, as we've said, you know, one of the really big differences working online is the limited opportunity for people to interact. And actually, from the point of view of the panel, from all of you when you're sitting on this side of the camera, the lack of feedback from the audience. And it means it can be really easy for the audience to disengage, and it can be harder, particularly with the webinar version where you're not seeing people's faces, to gauge how engaged the audience are. So the solution to this is to create some sort of state change. So doing something that gets your audience to engage, think, move, something changes. So whether that's getting people to raise their hands, you could get people to stand up, do some sort of activity, write something down on the paper in front of them, give you the answers in the chat box. It could be playing a video, it could be handing across to somebody else in the panel. It could be, as James and Sue have been doing, having that sort of, somebody's got a question, do you want to answer it, sort of dialogue that goes on. Another great way to get interaction is the polling facility. So this pops up in the middle of the screen when you deploy it, so you choose when to deploy it, and it allows you to survey the audience, and then you can display the results back to the audience. So you'll see them as they come in. So you get, as the host, you get to see what's happening with your poll, and you've then got a choice whether you report the results verbally or display them. And certainly personally, depends a bit on the numbers. Sometimes if I've got a low number of people on the call, I might verbally report what's going on. If I've got a good number of people there and I've got a clear answer with the poll, then it's quite nice to let people see it. And again, it's another state change because they've something else to look at. Just remember that whilst the poll is in front of the screen, you want to avoid talking about anything that people might want to refer to something that's on the screen behind the poll, because the poll's going to get in the way. There is a bonus with the poll facility that Zoom records the results, so you can keep them for posterity. So where if you run a poll about level of experience or people's backgrounds or what sort of licenses they hold or things, you're actually gathering useful information as well. So let's give this a try. I think you've got one set up, haven't you, James?
I have indeed. It's going to appear on the screen about now.
Oh, there it goes.
So
when you're running a poll,
if you could just...
Sorry, James.
I was just going to say, if all of you out there could just select your favourite colour. It's a very important question, and we're dying to know the answers. If you could select them and submit your answers, that'd be great. And over to you, Rupert.
Yeah, thanks, James. The other thing I was going to say is you want to keep quite a tight grip on your audience whilst you're doing this. So, and I know you're very hot on this, James, but you sort of want to say, right, well, you know, we're just about there. Give them another 5 seconds. I think there's 2 people who haven't voted at the moment, so you sort of got about another 3 seconds, and then I'm sure James will close the poll and show you all the results, just so you can see how the results appear. So that's the polling facility, and it really is, you know, if you let it run for too long, then people get a bit bored with it. As delegates, you can close it to get rid of it off your screen, and as I say, that's something that's controlled by the host. So that's polling. You've also got, with the webinar facility, the question and answer function. So we've been using it this evening. It's really helpful. It allows people to pose questions as you go, and then you can choose as the panel to answer them live. So if you've got multiple panelists, they can bid on which question to answer live. So as a panelist, what we're seeing is we're seeing a list of the questions you've asked, very much as you see on the screen. If I was then to go and say, well, I want to answer Jack Barker's question, I hit answer live, and James and Sue would see something that says, I've asked to answer that live. I can then get on and answer it. Or we can type the answer and that'll appear in the answered questions box, strangely enough. If we get comments coming in, we can dismiss them, you know, so comments that are not questions. They're useful. Once we've seen them, we can dismiss them so they don't clutter up the box. Ideal is if you've got somebody masterminding that box, certainly if you've got a bigger panel, and that's really, really helpful. So that's the Q&A box. And then the third thing that we can do is we can use a whiteboard. So particularly if you are a presenter who likes drawing stuff for people, then you can use something like a tablet as a whiteboard. So when we went on to share screen, and you saw the share screen piece earlier, you've got a couple of options. You can share a screen as a whiteboard and draw on it with a mouse, or I'm not a particular fan of that. I think it's clunky, but you could do the same if you've joined with a tablet. You can actually link a tablet or iPhone by cable and select the tablet or iPhone option, and again, it becomes a whiteboard for you. Tip when you're doing that is make sure you've got a good iPad pencil or electronic stylus and practice, because it's really, really easy, particularly if you've got poor handwriting like me, to write completely unintelligibly on a screen. So you just need to practice first to make sure you get something nice and legible, such as the example on the screen in front of you. You could use a flip chart. You could put it, you could stick it behind in the room, behind you, and stand up and use it. If your space allows, that works. In general, you're probably going to get a clearer result using the whiteboard. So unless you're really good with a flip chart and the environment supports it, I'd probably go whiteboard. And the final thing you can do that really helps engagement is when people put stuff in the box, then you can name check them. So thanking people and name checking them really helps, because it shows we're dealing with real people and we're actually seeing stuff that's important. So there we go, that's interaction. But as Sue says, about every 7 minutes, try and get some sort of state change.
It's then time to pull the presentation together, and I just want to know what your favourite colour was then, Alan. Did orange get your colour? Poor old orange, as Tony says, it could do with knowing. It would be really useful. When you're closing the presentation, it's just like it would be in a real face-to-face situation. Think about why you were doing this. Pull all those themes back together. If there are things that you want people to go and try or practice or look up or find out about, make sure you make those clear at the end. Do a full review. Basically, tell them what you've told them. Bring all the positive points out, but make sure you've answered all their questions. There is one not answered still at this point, and that's from Tony. Is polling only available in webinar or in meeting too? It is available in both. Is it not, Rupert? As far as I'm aware, when I've practiced, you can do it in meetings too, can't you?
I think you're right, although I've struggled to find it in meetings, so it's much easier to operate in webinar.
That's true. Yeah, that's very, very true.
I'm going to go hunting.
The last thing I would want to say during this closing your presentation, there's a thank you very much to Nigel. People's concentration typically we found 30 to 40, 45 to 50, thereabouts is what people say. Within these presentations, if we can get that interaction going, it's possible that we can extend it by just seconds. But I just wonder, have you all come across Zoom fatigue? You may be sick to the... I used to say I'm zoomed out, I've had enough. Today I've literally had about 1 hour when there's been no Teams call or no Zoom from 10 o'clock this morning, and it's just been mad. But it's quite a well recognized fact that when you are constantly on these virtual presentations by whatever method, we do get tired. When you talk to somebody face to face, you're picking up any number of visual clues, not just the face, not just the body, the arm gestures, but also little details like breathing. And you can focus on one person at a time, or you can just generally get a feel for what's going on in the room around you. But when you're on a virtual call or a virtual presentation like this, especially if you've got gallery view, you can be looking at 8, 9, 10, 20, however many people, and your poor brain is getting a bit fried because it's trying to take in all of these subliminal messages that are coming through as communications. I mean, we process so many thousand messages per second in a subconscious way, and your brain's still trying to do that from all these people it can see on the screen. It's ever likely it gets tired when it's trying to take all that in. The tone of voice is somewhat different. The audio may not be so clear. There's confusion with different people moving at different time. You can't actually make proper eye contact because you want to look at the person partway down the screen on the right, but they're not looking back at you. There's all of those difficulties that we're actually facing. And then on top of that, you're trying to overcompensate by creating that extra energy, putting the extra effort into your communication, and you're trying to give more than 100% when you're actually sharing. So you're working really, really hard to give, but massively hard to receive. So it is genuinely a tiring process. So the gallery view gives you multiple decoding of all of those messages, and it genuinely does make us tired. So I just thought you ought to know that that is a proper problem and recognised as such. There you go. James.
Thanks, Sue. Conscious as well of the time at the moment. The gathering feedback, obviously feedback is very important. And you can collect this in a number of different ways, be it via a Google form, a Microsoft form, or some other online survey tool. You need to choose the right process for you. It should be remembered, though, that if you are running a session that is funded by the BMSTT, you'll need to obtain the answers to the questions posed on the BMSTT evaluation form. So it's something to think about there. Motorsport UK, we are currently working on an online template that you can use for this purpose, and we'll hope to have that out to you all shortly. You should have also, of course, received the email about BMSTT applications now being open, which was sent out yesterday evening. So to summarise, over the past hour or so, hour and 18, 19 minutes, we've looked at the following 5 areas of organising your virtual training event, from the preparation to the presentation itself. We've also answered a number of your queries in the Q&A, and as we've mentioned before, these will be collated and shared with you along with a recording of the webinar. Sue, I'll just ask if are there any more questions in the Q&A that you'd like to raise at this point?
I think you've probably answered Keith's question already. Would we use a feedback form after a webinar? Yes, 100%, because you need to know. And, you know, every time we learn more about what we've done well, what we could have done better, and, you know, whether that particular activity was relevant or whether it felt a bit awkward, you know, we're learning so much on a regular basis that, and it's things like somebody said earlier, what if people aren't familiar with how to use all of this? Can we do it? Nigel, could we use the poll function for feedback? Can I just share with you that it is possible and legal to run a full AGM for a board of directors with full voting through Zoom. So I reckon if you can do that on Zoom, you can definitely use the poll function for feedback. Absolutely. They might get a bit fed up depending on how many questions you ask them. That's the only thing. Better that we provide a form after this, and Rupert and I have been working with Microsoft Forms over the last few weeks, and it's quite feasible that we might be sharing a template to help you with your BMSTT claims if you're using webinars for that purpose. Watch this space. That's on the next slide about what comes next, though. So we probably better wait for that one. So what does come next? Well, you know, we've got one of these next week for another group of trainers, which is fantastic. And following that, we're actually going to be asking all of you that have attended if you want to do a coached session on running a webinar. So the plan would be that we'd have, let's say, 12 people in a coached session. You would decide just 2 or 3 slides that you'd want to present on a topic of your choice so that you were prepared in advance. One of those one of those would involve interactivity, whether it's through a poll, a Q&A, a chat, however you wanted to do it. And then you could deliver that small piece of presentation to a small group in a meeting room, in one of these breakout rooms of maybe 4 or 5 people maximum in each room, and then get feedback on how it was delivered. So we're going to offer that opportunity to everybody. It's not mandatory. I know that some of you will absolutely jump at the chance, and I know others maybe perhaps not certain at this point. And it is something that we'll continue to offer because you might get more comfortable with it. But we'd like to offer that, but we'll do it after we've done the next session, and then we'll explain a little bit more about how that is done. So that's what's coming next. Thank you. I was just thinking James is going to close, but I will. I do like to have the last word, especially as don't like being put in the corner, as somebody said earlier on. Really a big thank you for attending. We tried the hour and a quarter, and we were kind of an hour and 18, an hour and 19. So I guess that wasn't such a bad estimate of time after all. Big thank you to you guys for giving up your evening, and hopefully there's lots of things that you found out. Tony, you've got your hand up. I don't want to miss out. Is there anything we should know that you have put in the Q&A for us to respond to, please, if you wouldn't mind? That would be great. So really, first and most important, thanks to you. Secondly, a big thank you to Rupert for giving up yet another evening. When somebody does this for a living, it just seems a bit silly not to ask them to come and help, and especially as he's such a nice guy as well. So thank you very much, Rupert.